Well, good evening, and thank you for tuning in online tonight for our Wednesday night broadcast at Victory. We're so thankful for each and every one of you that tunes in for all our services, whether it be on Sundays or Wednesdays. We're just very, very thankful for that. One of the things that we strive to do here is to develop a deeper walk with the Lord as well as deeper connections with one another. And we do that through groups, small group settings that meet here on campus. And we would love for you to be a part of these groups if you aren't already. We have multiple times that they meet, Sundays and on Wednesdays. Tonight, right after we hear from some special music from our worship team, we're going to move into one of those groups and let you hear and experience the teaching. We hope and trust it's a blessing to you tonight. Thank you so much again for being here this evening.
If you would like to give to Victory Baptist Church, there are several ways you can do that. You can go to our website, VictoryBaptist.Church, and click on the Give tab. You can give through our Planning Center app. You can text to give by texting any amount to 84321, or you can mail your offering to 150 Clark McCullers Drive, Loganville, Georgia 30052. If you are currently not receiving our new every morning devotions, we would love for you to sign up. Currently, close to 200 people receive a devotion each morning that includes a challenge from one of our staff or church members, along with a read through the Bible passage for that day. To sign up, go to our website, VictoryBaptist.Church, click on the New Every Morning tab, and then click on Daily Email Sign Up to put in your email address.
While sitting in his boat in the middle of the storm, Jesus came a-walking on the sea. He said, Peter, get out.
got this book from Brother Josh, which is what we're going to be working on. I believe it's in the next 11 weeks that we're going to be in here, and I am excited about teaching. Haven't been able to, of course, since March, and I've missed it. And when I jumped into this book, it made me realize how much I actually did miss teaching. But the book that we're going to be walking through together is called Facing Goliath and Dare to Engage in Spiritual Battle. Now, there's so many things about David in God's Word, but one thing, usually there's one or two things that jump right out in our mind, and I'm going to ask you to participate with me whether you want to or not. So let me ask you this. When you hear David, what thoughts first come to mind when we think about David? Just go. You ain't got to raise your hand. Exactly. That's certainly the most famous one. What about an incident in his life that maybe something he doesn't want to be as well known for? Exactly. So those two things, you read my mind, because those two, when I hear David, I think David and Goliath and what a victory he had there. But I also think about David and Bathsheba and the sin of adultery that he committed there and what it cost him in his life. So, but after all of that, with these, while these are perhaps the most notable events in David's life, Goliath was not the only giant that he faced. He was a man in many roles, a shepherd, a warrior, a servant, friend, leader, father, king, among many others. David experienced both victory and defeat, triumph and disaster, yet the most telling summary of his life is God's own one-line biography of him, and that he was a man after his own heart. And to have that said about you is definitely something that's worth noting in his life, being a man after God's own heart. So what the passage that we're going to read here, and you can open your Bibles if you have them, is 1 Samuel chapter 16. 1 Samuel 16, starting in verse 1 of 1 Samuel 16, it says, "And the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn over Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thy horn with oil, and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me." So fast forward a couple of chapters, his concerns are probably warranted because Saul was a man of a quick temper. And when Saul finds out later that David is going to be king, he doesn't like him very much. And if you'll remember, in 2 chapters later, in chapter 18, he actually throws a javelin at him trying to pin David to the wall, and David escapes. So Samuel's concerns here about, Lord, you want me to go anoint a new king while Saul is in power? Saul will probably come after me and kill me. But the Lord says, in verse 2, it says, "And the Lord said, Take an heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do. And thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably?" Now, Samuel was someone that he was often sent to bring judgment on others. So when the elders of the town saw this, what we first need to see in that verse, in verse 4, is that Samuel obeyed the Lord. It says, even though he may have feared for his life because Saul would come after him, Samuel did that which the Lord spake. So that means he obeyed the Lord first and foremost. That's the most important thing. But when the elders of the town see him coming, they are trembling and saying, "Are you bringing good news? Comest thou peaceably?" means please don't say that you're coming to bring God's judgment on us. And in verse 5 he answers and he said, "Peaceably. I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab and said, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said unto Samuel, "Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Society is no different in this aspect then as it is today. We look on people. I can remember when I was playing basketball when I was younger, and in 8th grade we played in a championship game, coincidentally right here in this lower gym years ago. That just shows you how old it was. 1994, so I'm getting pretty old. But I can remember hearing about this team that we were playing. I can remember it distinctly. It was Morgan County, and there was this guy who seemed to us like a Goliath, because, you know, when you're young, you think everything is a lot bigger and tougher than it actually is. So when I was in 8th grade, I probably thought he was a lot taller than he was, but let's say he was about 6, if I had to guess, 6'4", this guy that we were playing in 8th grade. And I wanted to see the birth certificate on this guy because I didn't believe he was in 8th grade. He looked like he was at least high school age, and he came in, he actually dunked on us a couple of times, and needless to say, we lost the game. But right off the bat, we were intimidated because of his outward appearance, his stature. And when Samuel sees Eliab here, one of Jesse's sons, he automatically thinks, this is it. This is the one whose God sent me, who sent me to anoint. This is going to be the next king of Israel. And I can't imagine Samuel's thoughts in his heart saying, what's he going to look like? Think about his stature and how the people will respect him and look up to him. But God says, hold on a minute. That's not the one that I want. Keep going. Keep going. So we read on here in verse 8, and it says, Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him to pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. So it was basically a fashion show of sorts, where each of these are introduced, and Samuel's saying, is this the one, Lord? Is this it? And the Lord says, no, I don't want any of these. None of these are the ones that I want you to anoint as king. And then in verse 11, it says, And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And the youngest said, Behold, and he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And so in verse 11, God told him, if you think about this, I never thought about it, probably should have before I read through this passage again for this lesson. In verse 1, if you look back, it says, at the end, it says, For I have provided me a king among his sons, talking about Jesse. Why don't you think God told him right off the bat, I want you to go anoint David, Jesse's son? Why don't you think he said that? God knew that Jesse had multiple sons, okay? So he knew Samuel wasn't going to go into this blindly and think there's only going to be one son for him to choose. He knew he had many sons. So why didn't God, do you think, tell Samuel right off the bat, I want you to go to anoint David, Jesse's son? Just give me some feedback here. What do you think? Why don't you think he wanted him to do that?
Because you don't learn anything from the obvious. So if there was an obvious pick, then everyone. But when you see that God picks the smallest of all his sons, or the least expected of all his sons, then there's a great lesson to be learned.
That's exactly right. So he did that because he had to teach Samuel a lesson. Because Samuel, he knew, God knows our hearts, he knew Samuel was going to go into it thinking the most impressive looking man is the one that I'm going to pick. It's going to be Eliab. And God said, no, that's not it. That's not the one that I want you to. So God is always trying to teach us things. Going into a certain situation, and you think, God, why don't you just reveal and tell me exactly what you want me to do right now? Why don't you just show me what you want me to do? He always God is always wanting to teach us something. And if we are willing to be taught and to be teachable, God is always willing to teach us something. That's what he did here with Samuel. So in verse 12, and he sent and brought him. Again, I want you to pay attention to this verse. It says, now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. When you hear that term ruddy, it always tends to be in the negative, like he was a runt or something. But that's really not the case. I'm reading the notes here in my Bible, and it says ruddy means, for example, reddish, a reference to the color of his hair and complexion, regarded as beautiful in areas where hair and complexion are usually dark. So it wasn't that and it says, it follows it up right there in the next few words, that he was withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. He was an impressive young man, okay? He wasn't somebody that was looked down upon. He was younger. Let me ask you this. Does anybody know about what age David was at this time when he was anointed by Samuel? Anybody? Yeah, so he could have been. It's not really confirmed. And I read several different areas. I saw as young as possibly 9 to as old as 15, okay? So we are talking about someone, I don't know about what you were doing at 10 to 15 years old, but I don't know. I hope this could be said of me, but David was probably, most likely, he was anointed to be the next king of Israel. God saw something in him that was impressive. And when kids are younger, we might think, well, they can't really do as much for God when they're that age. David didn't take to that. David was obviously doing what he was supposed to be doing, and he was serving God with all his heart. So he was a shepherd, but he did it to the best of his ability, and we'll get into that shortly. But in verse 13, the last verse in this passage here, it says, then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So what an impressive young man. Now, as an overview statement of this lesson, God calls every believer to service, but the believer must make a choice to respond to that call. In this lesson, we'll see David's preparation and his dedication prior to the call from God and his response to the call when it came. So, again, David wasn't living a life far apart from God when this came. He had to have been dedicating himself to the task that he was given. Obviously, being a shepherd and tending to the sheep, he did the very best job that he could at it. So number one, David's preparation. Every man who was mightily used by God, think Joseph, think Moses, Abraham, the Apostle Paul, and many others, went through a preparatory stage before starting the ministry. These times of preparation are usually filled with trials. Joseph, as we know, was sold into slavery by his own brothers and then condemned to prison for a crime he didn't commit. Anybody had that happen to them lately? No. So Joseph went through it, but look how God rewarded Joseph for being steady, for being faithful. If we look, in order for a building to stand, it must be prepared with a strong foundation. Anybody ever heard of the Willis Tower, formerly the Sears Tower in Chicago? Up until 2014, it was the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. It was surpassed by the One World Trade Center Memorial Tower in New York that's actually taller than that one now. But up until 2014, it held that distinction. It's 1,451 feet tall, 110 stories high, and when passers-by see it, they don't see the foundation that supports that building. But there is 100 feet of cement under the foundation of that building. 100 feet. I'd love to have seen the cement trucks that came and backed up there and how long it took them to fill 100 feet. We're building a home right now, and I can assure you that if the foundation on our home were to have been underneath the foundation of this Willis Tower, that structure wouldn't hold very long at all. Okay? So 100 feet. And then on top of that, It has, I believe, some 200 what are called caissons. I believe I'm pronouncing that right, which are round supporting structures and solid bedrock that go around that 100 feet of concrete. But when people come by and admire that building, and I've seen it before too, it's very impressive, nobody is able to see the foundation that supports that. But without that foundation, we know that it would crumble. Similarly, we view David as godly and one of the greatest kings in history. However, without the years of foundation that he built in his relationship with God, he would have been nothing. Okay, so we can fake being the Christian that we know we ought to be. I was raised in a Christian home my entire life, and I've gone through the motions at times in my life. And, embarrassed to say that I can fake it in front of you all, and you can probably say, wow, he's impressive in this area or that area. But if a trial comes in my life and I crumble immediately, that means my foundation, my preparation, and my worship with God is not really there. So his preparation, we see that he learned to know God. David had a deep relationship, a personal relationship with his Creator. In Psalm 8, verse 1, he wrote, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth, who has set the glory above the heavens. He came to know God as a young boy tending to his father's flocks in the hillside, long before he defeated the mighty Goliath. Long before he was crowned king of Israel, David cultivated a heart for God. When you think of CEOs, and I just rattled off a few here, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Tim Cook of Apple, and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and I'm sure they have other ventures as well. But when you hear about those three men, what do you think right off the bat? Money. That's how we view success, right? When I see somebody like that and I think those guys are loaded, they aren't having to worry about where the next paycheck's coming from. They could sit there and just watch the money pour in. I think of the show DuckTales when I was younger, and I would watch that show. Anybody know the show DuckTales? Okay, maybe I'm not as old as I thought I was. So the Scrooge McDuck in that show, the intro of that show shows him diving in a vault of money and swimming in his own cash, okay? That's how I kind of picture these guys here. And those are just three that came off the top of my head. Tim Cook of Apple, his company in 2019, not revenue, just profit, profited about $55 billion, okay? So that's not revenue. There's much more money that they brought in, but pure profit, $55 billion. Second most, another real estate, I think Berkshire Hathaway was the most profitable company. But $55 billion in profits. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, $98 billion is his net worth, just what he's worth. But the one that interested me, or the one that I chose to read about into a little bit more, was Jeff Bezos. His company he has the highest net worth of any American, maybe any businessman in the world, but I know for sure in America. And Amazon, his net worth is $193 billion, okay? And I always think, when it says like their net worth's $193.2 billion, I'm like, just give me that 0.2 and I'll be set for the rest of my life. But $193 billion, and look, I don't look down like our society today, as we all know in the day and time we live in. Society tends to condemn those that are wealthy and make a lot of money. They are considered the evil ones. I don't. There's nothing wrong with money. Okay, there's not one thing wrong with making money. I think that it's commendable. Now, do I think that he knows Jesus as his personal Savior? I don't think so. I hope he does, but I don't think so, and that's the most important thing. But I think it is admirable what he's done. Now, we see their unbelievable success and wealth, but what we don't see is what they had to endure to achieve what they have. Because we see these people and we just think that they were born with the silver spoon in their mouth and from day one they were given all this money, and now they're just worth that much more. That's not the case with most of these people. Okay, they started off very small. And I read how when he started Amazon, I believe in 1995, he was made fun of for doing it because he was high school. He graduated valedictorian of his high school in Miami, Florida, I believe. And he worked to get where he was. So he came up with this concept of a consumer-centric website where you could go online. If you keep in mind, in the mid-90s, this was all brand new and people were starting up these companies. He was told by people, though, that he shouldn't do that and that his idea would be better left to someone that didn't already have a good job. But regardless of that, he quit his job. He had a good job at the time, moved to Seattle, and out of his own house and his garage, he started selling books, which were the first things available online for Amazon. So his business model was he didn't buy the books that he was selling until they were sold. So someone would go online and they'd buy one of his books. He'd receive the order. He would purchase the book, go in his garage, and with his wife and 2 other programmers, were the only starting 4 people, he would pack hundreds of books by hand. All these orders on his own, ship them out. Long story short, he is the most successful company because of his vision. If you go on Amazon, I'm sure many of you in here have used it. I use it too. You can go on there and with a few clicks, you can think up of something and they have it online, okay? I don't care what it is. You can get the most random orders. I bought my daughter, Kinsey, a pair of Crocs, the shoes, my vitamins, and one other random thing, and they all came in at the same time. But that was his vision, his idea, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. But again, he had it noted in this article, he lost hundreds of millions of dollars in investments in companies that didn't pan out. I think it was a company called Pets.com and Gear.com that did not work out, and he failed miserably. But he picked himself up and he went right back at it again. David's life is an example of that. He has a lot of ups and downs in his life, but when it's all said and done, God still considered him a man after his own heart. So do we know God? Do we know God, or do we actually know him? I know these men that I just mentioned to you. Bezos, Tim Cook, Zuckerberg, I've seen them. I know if I saw their face, I could tell you who that person is. So I know them. But when we're talking about actually knowing God, it has to be on a much more personal level. So he learned to know God, and David learned how to use his gifts. David was a sweet-spirited musician. He was also a valiant warrior. He honed his talents as a young boy. In 1 Samuel 16 and verse 18, shortly after Samuel anoints David as the next king of Israel, in verse 18 there, it says, then answered one of the servants. This is one of Saul's servants because the word's starting to get around that Samuel has anointed David as the next king. They don't know when that's going to be, but the word is that David has been anointed the next king of Israel. And it says, then one of the servants, Saul's servants, said, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite that is cunning in playing. So he was a musician, and a mighty, valiant man, a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. They had to shoot a shiver up Saul's spine because he had been disobedient to God, and he knew that God was looking for his eventual replacement. But out of all those things, think how impressive David must have been at 10 to 15 years old for word to get out that he is an excellent musician. We would consider this in our day and age to be a well-rounded individual. He is a valiant man, a man of war, prudent in matters. That means he was wise and he thought ahead on certain matters. God has given every believer skills and abilities. And I'm a firm believer in this, that God gives us all at least one spiritual gift in life. And if we don't know what that is, then we need to pray that God reveals that to us. And the only way that He's going to reveal that to us is if we're serving in certain areas of our lives, and God will show us, hey, I want you to do this next. It may not necessarily be a ministry to get involved in. Maybe not. He may have you, he could have you tend to people that are in need. He may have you teach. He may have you be the best businessman that you can possibly be, because Lord knows we need godly Christian businessmen and women in this world today. So I believe He gives every one of us at least one spiritual gift, and we need to pray and ask God and seek Him as to what that might be. So David sharpened his skills with a sling long before he encountered Goliath. He developed his skills with a harp long before he soothed the spirit of Saul. If you remember, he played before Saul with his harp, and Saul was soothed by him because he was so good at it and talented with it. And do you think that when he went out there against Goliath, that was the first time he had ever used a sling? No way. He, as a shepherd protecting his sheep, had to fend off many animals and beasts that came after his sheep. So he was well versed in that. You don't have to turn here, but in Proverbs 18:16 it says, "A man's gift maketh room for him, and bringeth him before great men." No doubt was David one of these who had brought him before Saul's presence when he was able to play before him. We need to ask ourselves what gifts God has given us that we ought to be using for Him. So the first we saw is preparation, and the second point and last one for today is his dedication. It's been said that preparation is useless unless it is accompanied by dedication. From church attendance to reaching to the lost, to godly parenting, to caring for those in need, we need to be dedicated to the tasks that God has called us to. Imagine David spending, like I was saying, practicing with his sling for hours and hours, but running when he was confronted by a lion or a bear. Or practicing his musical skills only to turn down an opportunity to play for the king. From his youth, David exemplified commitment and faithfulness. He was diligent on the job. David's main responsibility as a boy was shepherding, a career that many would view as lacking excitement or opportunity for advancement. Again, we fixate on things. If I see someone else, whether it be here, at church, or at my workplace, that are doing something right in my eyes, and they are very successful, we try to emulate that. We want to be, a lot of times, what these people are, what we consider to be successful. David's job, his occupation, was not viewed as that. A shepherd was a very low on the totem pole. Okay? When you were a shepherd, there wasn't an opportunity for advancement to be the vice president of shepherding. That was it. That was his responsibility. But again, you don't focus on that. We have to focus on the fact that he did it with his whole heart. And he was all in with being a shepherd. His own brothers scorned him, but David took his job seriously and did it with all his might. I think about people in our church today, and the first person that raced to my mind was Brother Hope Pratt. And when I think about him, I think about one word, and that would be a servant. Look, Brother Hope's getting older now. He's getting older and, maybe not able to do the things that he once did, although the man still works on cars, and I dare to say he might be, I hope I'm not off here, 75 to 80 years old and still doing things that most younger men wouldn't even want to do. But when my dad was pastor here, and I know Brother Eric would say the same thing, my dad always never had to worry. He knew when he came to church that day that the doors would be unlocked, that the air or the heat would be turned on, that everything would be in its place because Brother Hope did it. And he never said, "Look at me, and do you know what I'm doing?" He was always behind the scenes, and there's always people like that. But that didn't mean that what he did was any less important than teaching or preaching, because it's all part of what makes things function and operate at the house of God. So he's a servant. So was David. Small or unimportant jobs do not exist to God. We need to be diligent in performing the tasks that God has entrusted to us. Ginger, my wife, has often mentioned to me, since this coronavirus thing started in March, I've been working from home since then, but prior to that, I was working in an office at a desk. And it suits me, though. I like to be to myself. I don't like a lot of outward distractions. I like to focus on what I'm doing and for people to kind of leave me alone, and I can get done what I need to get done. And she has come to my office before and said, I don't know how you do this. I don't know how you sit here in this place and do this. I don't know how she does what she does, or Miss Donna for 30 years plus did what she did. And all of you that are teachers, I don't know how you do that. But our jobs are not meaningless just because society might look down on them. Whatever you have to do, make sure that you're doing it for God's glory and to the best of your ability. Luke 16:10 says, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. So if we do everything that God has given to us to the very best of our ability, God will bless that. And we don't know what steps it might lead to. It may not lead to something bigger and better. But God will honor us if we do it to the best of our ability. There's been a quote, no idea who the guy is, Dr. F.B. Meyer. Says, don't waste your time waiting and longing for large opportunities which may never come, but faithfully handle the little things that are always claiming your attention. So don't always think that something is right around the corner. It might be. You might have a bigger and better opportunity somewhere else, but maybe God's just giving you what you have now to do to the best of your ability for years to come. Who knows how long that will be? We have to make sure that we're doing that. So he was diligent on the job. Secondly, he fulfilled his responsibilities. David's responsibilities to keep sheep and take food to his brothers were menial tasks, but David remained faithful to his daily task. And this is where I really want to hit. The question is, whether it be our daily work tasks, our service at church or outside of church, how dedicated are we to performing them to the best of our God-given abilities? We don't often know what result of our dedication will be. However, we are given daily responsibilities that God calls us to fulfill. Look, one of the most important responsibilities that we have for us, those of us that are parents, is to be the most godly parent that we can be to our children. And that is not a menial task at all. I have to remind myself a lot of times when I wake up that day is not just, these are good things, don't get me wrong, but it's not just is she provided for physically, do we have food, and thank God we haven't had to worry about that, and an income to be able to support a family. Those are good things. There's nothing wrong with that. But am I doing my duty as a father to teach her the things of God? And when I think about it, sometimes I fail at it, like many of us in here. We fail that we're supposed to be doing. But we have to make sure that we don't consider those as menial, lower-end tasks. They're very important to God. The reason that He gives us children is to be good stewards of them. It is only our obedience that He requires of us. The results of our obedience are determined by God. Let me read this story to you here. This is a Navy recruiting commercial. I'm not sure the year, but it's quoted as saying, "The call to serve, it has no sound, yet I have heard it whispering, retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it in the eyes of the men and women, infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate is soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call for their country, for their fellow man, and for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth." And we've all seen, the military commercials. They do a great job in recruiting others because of their motivational messages that they have. But there's no more important call, and this whole lesson is answering God's call. There's no more important call than God's call in our life. And again, people might say, I purchased for a security company. Is that really God's calling in my life? For now it is. That's what we have to think of it as. God doesn't call everyone to be teachers, to be missionaries, to be pastors wives, missionaries' wives. He doesn't call everybody to do that. He wants us to do right now what we're supposed to be doing. And for right now, for me, it's the job that I'm at right now. And He wants me to have a testimony. There's people at my workplace I know 100% sure that they're lost. I know that. And although I'm working from home now, I can still do things that would honor Him. I can still email, text, or call the people on my team with messages of encouragement, ask them how their day's going, do these things that maybe others wouldn't do. But God reminds me of these things sometimes and says, you should be doing this or you should be doing that. So we have to make sure that we're doing that. Now next week, and again, I want to run through just some of these lessons to maybe pique your interest a little bit. But this week was daring to answer God's call.
I hope that was an encouragement to you tonight. You may want to know more information. Maybe you have some questions. Maybe you'd like to pray with somebody and talk to somebody about some spiritual matters in your life. We have a pastoral care line, and we would love for you to be able to call. We have pastors standing by right now to be able to take those calls and assist you. We also have Wednesday night program for our teens as well as our young people. We have an Awana program here. And perhaps you or someone you know might like to be a part of that. You can find this and a whole lot more information on our website, VictoryBaptist.Church. God bless you and have a great evening.